Hello, folks. My name is Milan Rai, and I'm the editor of Peace News, which has been published since 1936, and I've been the editor since 2007. So, one of the one of the things that has changed the world is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and off the bat, obviously, the invasion of Ukraine was illegal. It was immoral. It was not justified. There are lots of things one can say about it, the complicated history leading up to it, but it's a crime. The invasion is a crime. The invasion annexation of Crimea in 2014, that's a crime. Russia has been committing so many crimes, and right now, obviously, with what it's doing to the Black Sea Grain Initiative and to Ukrainian grain, it's horrifying what Russia has done. However, just because Russia has committed horrifying crimes doesn't mean that there is a military solution to this conflict. And that's what I'm here to say some words about. What I'm going to put forward now is not a pacifist case. It's not even a peace movement case. This is an argument that has been put forward by the top military officer in the United States Armed Forces. When there's an opportunity to negotiate, when peace can be achieved, seize it, seize the moment. Those were not the words of the editor of Peace News or the General Secretary of CND. Those were the words of the chair of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, Army General Mark Milley, on the 9th of November 2022, speaking to the Economic Club of New York about Ukraine. So just to be clear, the Joint Chiefs of Staff are the leaders of the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and he's the chief of that body. The New York Times reported the next day, 10th of November 2022, that Milley had argued in private top-level meetings for Ukraine to enter peace negotiations with Russia to end the war. After the Ukrainian successes in the Donbass region, including recapturing the city of Kherson on the 9th of November, Milley was said to believe that the Ukrainians had achieved as much as they could reasonably expect on the battlefield before winter set in, quote, and so they should try to cement their gains at the bargaining table. In White House discussions, Milley, making a hard-headed assessment of the military realities and citing satellite images of trenches being dug by Russian forces, is said to have referred to the example of the First World War, quote, when the two sides engaged in years of trench warfare with little change in territory but millions of pointless casualties. And on the 10th of November, Milley spoke on US television, saying, we think there are some possibilities here for some diplomatic solutions. And he didn't stop there. On the 16th of November, Milley again argued publicly for diplomacy, saying at a press conference that the Ukrainians might be able to achieve through negotiations what they were unlikely to achieve through military force. So this is a quote from Milley at the press conference. There may be a political solution where politically the Russians withdraw. Russia right now is on its back. The Russian military is suffering tremendously. You want to negotiate at a time when you're at your strength and your opponent is at weakness. And it's possible maybe that there'll be a political solution. All I'm saying is there's a possibility for it. So he's the top military official in the United States. The US civilian political leadership, the president, vice president, and so on, the administration, made it clear they disagreed with their top general. And he has not spoken out again in the same terms. He's been shut up. After these repeated statements by the most senior officer in the US military, no one who calls for a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine war can be dismissed as naive. The most powerful general in the world, with the world's most powerful intelligence agencies at his fingertips, believes that peace negotiations to end the Ukraine war are overdue. And back in November, Milley argued that peace talks had a chance of winning Ukraine advantages that it could not gain by military force. These are not the beliefs of an idle dreamer disconnected from reality. So the most important fact in this war is that Ukraine and Russia came right to the edge of signing a peace deal back in April 2022. The second most important fact about this war is that Western leaders, including Boris Johnson, worked to undermine that peace deal, which they did successfully. So Russia and Ukraine met for peace negotiations in Istanbul, Turkey, in late March 2022, as the war was starting its second month. They negotiated away, and the Ukrainian government put forward peace proposals, which it published on the presidential website. You can go look it up. And under those proposals, Ukraine would confirm its status as a non-aligned neutral state, so it would never join a military alliance, including NATO, would never allow foreign military bases or foreign military forces onto its territory, even for exercises, military exercises. And in return, Ukraine's security would be guaranteed by a number of countries, including the US, Britain and France, and Russia, other countries, who would be required to intervene militarily if Ukraine was attacked. Ukraine would also be encouraged to join the European Union. And so Crimea, which Russia took in 2014 and annexed, which has not been recognized by anyone, it's illegal. The status of Crimea would be negotiated during a 15-year period, and neither party would use military means to change the status of the peninsula during this time. So that means Ukraine would not try to invade and retake Crimea for 15 years while they talked about it. That was what Ukraine published. You can go look on their own site. They published as their peace proposals to Russia. Arrangements for the disputed Donbas region in southeastern Ukraine would also be negotiated separately. So a senior advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Mihailo Podolyak, told the Financial Times at the time that from the Ukrainian point of view, any deal would involve the troops of the Russian Federation, in any case, leaving the territory of Ukraine captured since the 24th of February 2022. So that was what the Ukrainians were aiming for. We don't know exactly what the Russians counter-proposed and kind of where it got to. We don't know because shortly after that, the Ukrainians withdrew from the talks and the deal collapsed. There is public evidence about Russia's attitude to these peace talks. In January this year, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said, by the end of March 2022, the two delegations agreed on the principle to settle this conflict. And he went on, it is well known and was published openly that our American, British and some European colleagues told Ukraine that it is too early to deal, and the arrangement, which was almost agreed, was never revisited by the Kiev regime. Vladimir Putin has himself publicly praised the Istanbul peace deal several times. So last year, 21st September 2022, Putin said, after the Istanbul talks, Kiev representatives voiced quite a positive response to our proposals. But a peaceful settlement obviously did not suit the West, which is why after certain compromises were coordinated, which means that the Ukrainians put forward their position, the Russians counter-proposed, they came to some coordinated deal, according to Putin, which is why after certain compromises were coordinated, Kiev was actually ordered to wreck all these agreements. The next month, 31st of October 2022, Putin said at a press conference, we came to terms with them in Istanbul, but they later threw everything into the rubbish bin. 2 months ago now, about 6 weeks ago, on the 17th of June, Putin met with African Union leaders in St. Petersburg, and he showed them a copy of the draft peace treaty. And there's a bit of video of this you can see on the internet. Putin did not reveal the contents of the draft treaty, but he described them as not bad. And he also said that the document had been initialed, which means agreed in principle, by the leader of the Ukrainian negotiating team. So the reason why he was showing that to the Ukrainian African Union leaders was because they had come to St. Petersburg to press Russia to do more on the diplomatic side, to make more of an effort on the peace side. And he was saying, we got this close and it's not our fault that it fell through. So again, he was not dismissing it, he wasn't rubbishing it, and if he'd wanted to destroy the possibility of there ever being an agreement on that basis, he would have revealed what was in it, but he didn't. So one factor in the collapse of the Istanbul talks was the intervention of the British Prime Minister of the time, Boris Johnson, who travelled to Kiev on the 9th of April to personally lobby Zelensky to pull out of the peace talks. So there's a Ukrainian online newspaper called Ukrainska Pravda. It's got nothing to do with Russia. It's a mainstream Ukrainian magazine. According to them, Johnson said that Britain would not sign the security guarantees, which were a crucial part of the package, and he said that Ukraine should fight on. So what Ukraine is saying is, we have reached a deal with Russia, and in order to pull it off, US, Britain, and so on, you've got to sign the security guarantee to say that you will back up this deal by force, so that if we ever get attacked in the future, you will come to our defense. And Boris Johnson said, I will not sign that. I won't sign anything that Russia's signing. Ukrainska Pravda judged that Johnson's visit was one of two major factors in the collapse of the negotiations, along with the revelation of Russian atrocities in the town of Bucha. Confirmation of the role of the Western powers in the collapse of the peace talks has come from an unlikely source, Naftali Bennett, who was Prime Minister of Israel at the time. Bennett was heavily involved in the peace negotiations, visiting Moscow and Kiev. He has described both Zelensky and Putin as being pragmatic in these talks. Putin gave up on regime change in Ukraine, which he calls denazification, and Zelensky gave up on NATO membership. Bennett, this is a quote, was under the impression that both sides very much wanted a ceasefire, and he gave the odds of any deal holding at 50-50. So he's going and talking face to face with these folk. He's mediating. According to Bennett, he consulted closely with Western leaders during these negotiations. Anything I did was coordinated down to the last detail with the US, Germany, and France. And his interviewer, you can see this interview on YouTube. It is in Hebrew, but you can see it. His interviewer asked at this point, so they blocked it? And Bennett says, basically, yes, they blocked it, and I thought they were wrong. So here are some other important points about peace negotiations and this war. One is that, unfortunately, one of the barriers to a negotiated end to this war is a Ukrainian law passed in October 2022 that bans peace talks with Russia so long as Putin remains in office. It is illegal for Ukraine to engage in peace talks with Russia under this law, which was signed by Zelensky. Russian officials have also made remarks which make peace negotiations harder. They've hinted that they will refuse to discuss any change in the status of the parts of Ukraine that they have illegally annexed in the Donbass region. However, they have not passed a law banning negotiations with Ukraine until after Zelensky has been replaced. Russia's official position, which may not be completely honest, but its official position, is that there should be no preconditions before further peace negotiations take place. Ukraine actually has a long list of other preconditions that make negotiations impossible. So they're going around organizing peace conferences at the moment about their peace program, their peace plan. It's not a peace plan. It's not an attempt to negotiate, but a set of impossible preconditions for talks, including the withdrawal of all Russian forces from all Ukrainian territory before peace talks can begin. That's not a peace plan. That is an attempt to distract people from the fact that they don't want negotiations right now and they have this law against it. So unfortunately, that is a barrier at the moment to a negotiated end to the war. In February, US President Joe Biden said that the US would be with Ukraine for as long as it takes, which sounded like a very strong commitment. However, there were signs earlier that the US was preparing to wind up the Ukraine war with a negotiated settlement. So back then, they indicated to the Ukrainian leadership that the spring-summer was its best chance to decisively change the course of the war before the Republican-controlled House of Representatives reduces the level of security and economic assistance to Ukraine, and US public opinion becomes less enthusiastic about spending billions of dollars supporting the Ukrainian war effort. So in mid-February, the Washington Post reported that a senior official had said to them, as long as it takes pertains to the amount of conflict, it doesn't pertain to the amount of assistance. So the Biden administration was saying, yes, we'll support you all the way, but we may not be able to give you military and economic support all of the way, and therefore you should make a push and win some territory in the spring-summer. The Washington Post reported that this message about the critical nature of the next few months was passed on to the Ukrainian government in January in blunt terms by the director of the CIA, William Burns, Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner, Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, Undersecretary of Defense Colin Kahl, all of whom visited Ukraine in January to tell them they basically had a deadline to make progress. The Ukrainian government, on its side, has publicly expressed an enthusiastic commitment to retaking Russian-occupied Crimea by force. Many observers believe that anything approaching that could trigger a massive Russian response, possibly including nuclear strikes. So British Rear Admiral Chris Parry told the Daily Telegraph on the 12th of February, Ukraine will do well to leave Crimea alone for now. It is absolute kryptonite to the Russians, and they will die in numerous ditches to hold on to it, even if they lose everything else. But Ukraine continues to publicly say that that is their goal, and they keep making military moves which are in that direction. The alternative to this kind of escalation and the dangers that it poses to the people of Ukraine and to the wider world is negotiation. If negotiations are coming anyway, we don't know if they are, but there were reports that that was what the US was saying. If negotiations are coming anyway, and if the alternatives risk devastating escalation, why not negotiate now? We can't know what the possibilities are until negotiators sit down at the table and try. Now people say, and they're absolutely right, it is up to the Ukrainians to decide when to negotiate, how to negotiate, and what is an acceptable deal. That's absolutely true, and that principle was violated by Boris Johnson in April 2022 when the Ukrainians said, we have reached a deal, and Boris Johnson said, not good enough, I am not backing that deal, and I want you to carry on this war. So this principle, which British government officials say, oh yes, the Ukrainians must decide, when they decide the wrong thing, they get torpedoed. If only Boris Johnson and other Western leaders had accepted that principle in April 2022, rather than refusing to sign up to the security guarantees Ukraine was asking for, and pushing Ukraine to dump the peace treaty had just worked out with Russia, to dump it in the bin, then who knows where we might be now. Western powers, like Britain, must stop undermining peace talks and express their support for a negotiated solution.